Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Joshua Scott Edwards. Joshua, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. I was trying not to mess it up. I don't know why that's hardest thing for me lately. I've done it I think the more I do it, I'm like, don't mess up, don't mess up.
Oh
It's
yeah,
really
reading from
bad.
a script. It's like you'd think it'd be easy. It's just reading, but
Yeah, well, I took the script out now because I thought it'd be easier. I think I might go back to it. I don't know. It's really weird. I'm just somebody's gonna notice if you change one word, so I try to keep it the same. It's too much pressure, Josh. It's just too much pressure. Well, thank you so much, Joshua, for coming on today. I was really excited. I actually had you on for inviting you for season three. I have a possible podcast guest list that I've been creating for some time. As soon as I saw your book come up, I was like, oh my gosh, you'd be so much fun to interview. And I feel like you and I have very similar styles
Hmm.
of branding styles. So you're doing what I want to do, particularly when I went to your website. I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly how I want to be portrayed, or my writing or books to be portrayed. So yeah, it was really cool. I had somebody bail out. They're like, oh, really sorry, I have production things. I'm like, that's okay. I'm like, I have Joshua Scott Edwards right at the list there. So yeah, you were right at the top of my list for season three. So it's cool that we could just kind of slide you in there. So yeah, thank
Yeah,
you so much for responding to my Twitter message, and I'm excited
yeah,
to
of
get you on
course.
today. So
Yeah, I'm excited too.
awesome. Well, we'll start right in there with that first question, which is one of my favorites personally as a writer. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Yeah, so I feel like probably for a lot of people, the writing journey starts with just reading, right?
Yeah.
So that was definitely the case. Growing up, I read like lots of fantasy. And when I say growing up, I mean like when I was a small child, like reading Redwall and oh
That's a
man,
great one.
man, I want to revisit that story eventually, see if it holds up
Yeah,
still.
yeah.
Harry Potter, of course, back in the day. Um, but my first thing I ever wrote, I think I was like in fifth grade,
Oh, wow.
and I wrote like the start of a story called The Golden Sword.
Oh, that sounds
So
awesome.
it was probably terrible. I think it started with me like walking out of my house or something, just like going on an adventure. I had no idea how to write a story at that time, but some part of me clearly just like wanted to tell stories, and specifically fantasy stories. But then I went into like a reading slump, which is apparently pretty common for boys. Like
Yeah.
I think at like 13, I just bounced off of like the fifth Harry Potter book and then didn't pick up a book for fun until like I was in college.
All right.
So college comes around, I get back into reading. I discovered A Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin's works, and I'm just like addicted. I'm hooked. And I start coming up with all these stories that I want to write, and they're like way too ambitious. Like there's like a science fiction fantasy like blend that I want to do at some point, but I'm like I have no idea how to market that. I don't even know how to write it. I am a terrible writer at first. Um, so I was like, all right, you know what? Practice story. And that's where this first book
Cool.
came from. And it actually started just as like a collection of notes from a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that my
Oh,
friends were
cool.
running. And the main character, his name is Grim, was my character in the campaign. And yeah, the first draft was just like really terrible, just posting it on Discord just to kind of like keep everybody up to date with the story. Um, and then I was like, well, if this is going to be a practice story, I should probably do it the right way. And I just started doing like iterations on the drafts and just kept going. And all of a sudden I'm like, what? I have like a real book here that I'm
Oh,
ready to publish. And I guess for the video viewers, I'll hold it up here, An
all
Ocean of
right.
Others.
Yeah, it looks
So
terrific.
thank you. That's Felix Ortiz and Sean King. They're incredible. I
Which is
I,
why I
I
gotta have
attribute,
them on. I'm like, oh my gosh.
yeah. That'd be a great interview. I'd
Yeah, I
love to
know,
hear their
right?
process.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, like I attribute 90% of my success to just Felix Ortiz and Sean King.
yeah.
Just that amazing cover that just draws everybody in. I was so happy with that. But yeah, that's kind of how I've gotten to this point. And now I worked on the book for 3 years. It just came out in September of 2022 this year, and yeah, now I write pretty much every day. And I feel like
Well,
if I don't write, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. So
definitely know that feeling. Well, when I saw your book, it was funny because when I saw your book, and I think it was like three others too that kind of came out relatively the same time. I'm like, Felix did that cover, and
yep.
he very quickly became like what my definitely like top two favorites, him and one of my other artists. I'm like, I go back and forth because it's like I feel like it's like Rocky and Ivan Drago. Like one of them comes out with this amazing, work, and then the other one does the same thing, and I'm like,
Who's
the
the
whole
other
time.
artist?
Joel, totally gonna like I'm gonna have to look up his last name.
That's okay.
Sorry, Joel Oberstein. Joel Oberstein.
Mm,
And he does more like concept stuff, but I'm trying to get him on too. I really think one of these days it'd be so cool to have him, Felix, and like there's a couple artists that have I've seen, but I haven't gotten to talk to. But I think it'd be cool to have like four of them come on and talk about their different processes.
yeah.
But yeah, Felix is such a cool guy. Like I was looking for a banner to be made for our website, and we're actually that's one thing we're redoing on our site. Is we're going to be flip flopping the art and stuff out. But
Nice.
yeah, he was like, I was like, oh, can you do something like this? And I sent him a couple images, and he was like, I just messaged him on Facebook. I was like, hey, really love your work, love you on Wizards, Words, and Words. He had just done like three different episodes on there with the guys, and he was like, oh, what do you need? And I'm like, oh, I'm just looking for this. And he goes, that's gonna cost you like 1,500 on average. He goes, you should really just go to Adobe stock images and just put something together. He's like, it's only like $10. And then we found one that we really liked. So I was like so thankful there because he could have very easily been
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'll do that,
Yeah.
1,500 bucks, and I had the money at the time. So I just think like, that was really professional of him, and like he was
Yeah,
like, oh,
definitely.
sorry, like the day I got home, he's like, oh, sorry, I'm really busy. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. He literally got back to me like his time the next morning at like 8 o'clock with kids. I'm like, okay. And then to say that, so I was just like, I've talked to him a lot on like Facebook and stuff since. Like he's just a great guy. But yeah, I love
Yeah.
his work. But yeah, him and Sean are just like anytime I see one of
Yeah.
their covers, I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, you can always tell.
yeah, yeah. If I were like Tor or Orbit, I would have like just been throwing money at those guys. So I
Right?
I want to have them on and be like, has this not happened yet? Or do you guys just like to be independent? I cannot believe that somebody would look at your book cover and be like, okay, we're just gonna let these guys be our competition. Like I'd be like,
Yeah,
let's
right.
get them in here, like pay them whatever they want. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Silicon Valley style. It should just get acquired.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, that's what they're doing with authors now. I'm surprised that they don't do the same thing. I think it'd be smart if they did that with everybody, in the indie community.
Yeah.
And then you're eliminating competition, and I don't know. It's really interesting to me. But yeah, they definitely do the best job, in my opinion, than even traditionally
Hmm.
published, between cover artists and and lettering and stuff like that. I mean, you can definitely tell, right? There's like your book really pops compared to other books when you're looking particularly on, Kindle or Twitter, or something like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, yeah.
Felix is he's a wizard too. Like I
He is a
I think
wizard.
I sent him a prompt and like 2 days later he's like, it's done. And I'm like, what? How did you do
So
that?
I couldn't believe how quickly I don't have Mark's book here. Mark Timoney and I are friends, but
Oh
I
yeah.
like the bookmarks, but like yeah, like he had like the star binder
Hmm.
done like
Great book.
so well. Yeah, and like I mean just and like the blood of the spear, it's just and he's like, yeah, I gave it to him. He goes, he was send this to me in like 3 hours. And he's sir star binder got this for his novella. It's got this purple that's just like out of this world. It reminds me a lot
Yeah.
of Michael R. Fletcher's Obsidian Path.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was like, how? I've asked him that quite a few times. I was teasing the other day because he had a new one come out, and I was like, could you save some talent for the rest of us, please?
Yeah, right.
He's like, he goes, I'll try, and I'm like, but it's funny that for those guys, like even because I talk to people, like I love authors, and they're like, I love hearing different authors. I love sharing stuff for authors, and people are always who aren't authors are always asking me, they're like, why do you help each other? Isn't this a competition? And I'm like, it's really not. I said, I consider if we each push each other up the mountain, particularly for India, I'm like, how far could we go? And
Yeah.
I always tease Felix and Sean about that all the time, but because I just think they do amazing work, but they make me want to, put what's in the book, make that just as amazing as, the outside the book. So
Yeah.
it's healthy competition, I guess. But yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So I just was curious, just before we get into some of those other questions,
Mhm.
did you just like email Felix or Sean separately, and just say like, hey, like, do you guys mind, doing this? Like, I was just curious, kind of how that whole process like went down.
Yeah. So actually, you mentioned The Blood of the Spear. That's actually the book that introduced me to Felix's work. And I was like, man,
Love that
this
cover.
is great. And I look him up on ArtStation and I'm just like scrolling through in amazement, just like, oh my goodness, this guy,
4 hours
I
later.
want him. Yeah. I, and he was my first pick. And I'm like, there's like very little chance he's gonna respond to me. Like in my mind, I guess I built him up as like he's just so talented, so incredible. There's no chance he's gonna work with like some nobody like me. Um, and instead he just like responds and he's the coolest guy ever. And
He really
like
is. Yeah.
yeah, he's super friendly, super helpful. Like we went back and forth on a couple different ideas right away. And yeah, I mean, I reached out to him. Um, and I think maybe like 2 days later, he got back to me and we got on the schedule. And a couple months later, he was like, all right, well, I worked on your idea and it didn't work. So do you have any other ideas? And then, yeah, Sean King, I reached out to him separately. It was one of actually the big mistakes I made in just the whole publishing process was not getting both of them involved earlier.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so like I guess I didn't realize just how busy they are.
Oh yeah.
But once I decided to work with them and got the okay from them to work on them, I ended up having to like push my release date back, just because I was like, all right, well, they're worth it. I'll wait an extra
Yeah, for
3 months.
yeah.
Yeah.
I always wonder about that, with different, just for like our audience. So what we're talking about here is, with Sean T. King, who we talked about before, it's, you really want to think about your cover and how you're getting that cover. You don't want to just get an amazing cover and then not think of where the lettering is going to go, where your name
Hmm.
is going to go. I used to teach graphic design. I used to want to be an illustrator. So, I've looked into a lot of those different things. So just for our audience, like, it's really something to think about. So if you look at like, like your cover, that clearly was, between them was talked about and was really well thought out. So I've seen some others, where they cut something off, or, it really, they sometimes they, people have to pay somebody to redo, their cover
Yeah.
just to get the lettering on. So it's definitely something, that's a good point. It's definitely something to consider, particularly if you're going to have two people working on it, or even if you're trying to work on it yourself. Yeah. And then you got to think about things too, right? Like the wraparound, or, you
Hmm.
know, hardcover, paperback, things like that. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, it looks awesome. So
Thank you.
you talked a little bit about your genre, but for our audience, what genres do you currently write in, and why?
Yeah. So mostly I read fantasy. So I mostly write fantasy. um, but I also write sci-fi because I love
Oh,
reading
cool.
sci-fi too. So I've got a sci-fi serial horror that's going on my website right now.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome. I have to write that down. That's cool.
Yeah, it's called Grave of the Waiting. I publish a chapter every month, which is it's challenging getting a
Oh yeah,
chapter
yeah,
out
yeah.
every month. Um, but yeah, I mean, like just fantasy and sci-fi. In some ways, like they seem like on the same continuum to me. Like they're almost like the same genre, just like with different styles.
Yeah,
I love how both of them just allow you to just kind of think about things that don't exist in the real world and just kind of like come up with all these cool scenarios that like you'd never be able to get in
yeah,
like contemporary
yeah.
or just like literary fiction. I guess you can get like magical realism type
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
but
that's fair.
typically the stories that tend to resonate with me for whatever reason are just like the really dark stories.
Mm,
So like Game of Thrones, pretty dark. Berserk is one of my big ones.
mm.
Um, yeah, just stuff like that. So I think that kind of seeps into my writing a little bit, where I try not to hold back and try and make the tone like too light. Feels like more realistic to me in a way, to just like follow through with like the actual consequences. Like someone gets hit in the arm with a sword or something like that, and they don't have armor protecting them. Like there's a good chance they're going to lose that arm.
Yeah, yeah,
You might
yeah.
get like sepsis or something like that.
Yeah.
uh, it's not just like, oh man, you just I did battle, and
Just a
no,
plus
let's go
wound.
do more battle.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like video gamey in a way. It almost feels
Yeah.
like. um yeah, so uh yeah, I guess that's just why I've got like sci-fi horror. Like I didn't want to just do sci-fi. I think An Ocean of Others has a lot of horror elements in it too.
Cool.
um I kind of market it as grimdark, but this, I think this story is like a little less grimdark than maybe some people would expect, especially given the cover looks pretty like gritty and brutal.
Yeah,
It's like a guy like holding up a hand, like trying, don't kill me. uh that was all Felix's idea.
yeah.
But yeah, so uh how was I going to say, just yeah, sci-fi, fantasy, a lot of dark elements. That's mostly what I write in. I think I did write one just sort of like, I don't even know what to call it, just like a sort of like a literary short story on my website.
Oh, gotcha.
It's called This Side of History.
Oh,
It's
that's cool.
probably not very good, but if you're interested in reading non-sci-fi fantasy stuff by me, there it is, one short story.
That's awesome. Oh, it is funny that you mentioned, like sci-fi and fantasy kind of being, like part of that same coin, right? Well, you have to
Mhm.
build, you have to take some of that realism from our world that people can connect to, but then still make it fantastical in some way. So I think that makes total sense. I always tease
Mhm.
the sci-fi authors on here. I'm like, fantasy's better. And the only reason I tease them about that is because like I absolutely love sci-fi, but for me, like sci-fi is harder to write. I don't know why. I've read so much sci-fi, so much more sci-fi because I discovered sci-fi early as a
Mhm.
reader compared to fantasy. Um, that to me, it's interesting what people are able to come up with, and I have quite a few sci-fi authors. They're like, "No, you can do it. Like, we'll help you," and I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, as soon as I get some of the fantasy stuff done, but yeah, it's I definitely love sci-fi too, and yeah, they're definitely I think as a writer, you get different things from both, right? And I
Mhm.
think that even with subgenres, that's one of the things. And I think sometimes it's hard for people within fantasy or sci-fi, like you're talking, like to really find where you fit, And I
Yeah.
think people just think, "Oh, I'm a fantasy author." It's like, you're not. You're something within there, And like I have like historical urban fantasy, which I really want to write. I have a lot of ideas. I'm a history teacher. I have a lot of ideas that
Mm.
I want to incorporate fantasy or urban fantasy into it. So I'm like kind of I don't know, I'm like I'm gonna create my own genre, historical urban fantasy, and
Yeah.
and I think that it just sounds more fun. They say write what you want to read, and I like when people do stuff like that. So, but yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you. It's hard to find your little niche and figure out sometimes what your what genre or subgenre you are within. But yeah, I like that you said that though, that you have more horror in there because Richard Lee Byers is one of my favorites, and
Mm.
he's written a lot of fantasy, but it also has a lot of horror in it, and those are some of the best. Those are some of the best books I've ever read. It just makes it more. I don't know. It makes it very unique. So to me,
Yeah.
that gets me even more excited for your book now, just knowing that. So
Oh, that's awesome.
Grimdark is great, but I love when people put those horror elements into fantasy. It just ends up you need like your own subgenre there. Like,
Yeah.
like my friend and I were just talking about that a while back. We're trying to come up with a really cool name for horror fantasy. We'll help you guys. Don't worry. Be like grimdark horror or something like that. Like
Yeah.
something cool.
When I was trying to figure out how to market this book, I was like, oh, I guess it's like dark fantasy. It's real dark. And then I look at all the dark fantasy stuff, and it's like werewolf and
Yep.
like vampire stuff, and I'm like, nah, I guess this isn't really what it is.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Dark fantasy to me, like, and that's so interesting that you said that because there's so many dark fantasy books that, I think were more. There was a lot of people I knew years ago, like really like the '90s, like authors that would read where, they weren't quite sword and sorcery, so then they're like, oh, I'm dark fantasy, and then dark
Mm.
fantasy, yeah, it like really really changed, and now I
Yeah.
think it's way different than it used to be. So that's where I'm thinking like you almost need like your own moniker now, like they did for dark fantasy versus sword and sorcery, but. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll come up with something good before we're done. Like,
Yeah.
it'll be really good. So, well, now that third question, which is definitely one of my favorites, because I love talking to authors about, their books and their products. And like I said, I saw you it popped up. I was like, this is definitely a book for me. So I was curious at what your book, An Ocean of Others, is about and how you came up with this idea. You talked a little bit about how you came up with it, but can we get into that meat a little bit? What the book's about?
Yeah. So my elevator pitch essentially is
Hmm,
that it's
I
the
like that.
story in a world where a plague essentially has been unleashed as the result of a failed experiment.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the plague drives living people insane, and it turns dead when they die, it turns them into monsters. They like emerge as these horrific creatures that have these powers to manipulate people's emotions. That it's part of what drives everybody insane. Uh, and it follows this a bounty hunter, the last bounty hunter in the city of Leeuwen, who does not know that he's already infected, but he
Ooh.
needs to basically he's the only one who can stop the madness. But the question is whether he can do it before he succumbs and becomes a monster himself. So it's very different actually from the D&D story
Oh, I was gonna
because
ask. That's excellent.
yeah, the D&D story, like it follows the same characters, the same sort of plot, but I was like, you know what, like D&D, it's like a lot of it is about just like the silly moments with your friends and
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
and just having fun. And I needed to kind of like chisel it down into an actual like story that will sell books.
yeah.
Um, and part of that chiseling is like emphasizing the just the elements that are going to be important that maybe weren't quite so prominent in the story that we played in the campaign. And I think the sort of plague aspect where people are being like driven insane is something that kind of came out of just my drafting process.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think before it was basically just a story about uh, a bunch of guys going on wacky adventures fighting monsters. And I tried to turn it into something where it's like about a guy who's trying to fight the madness building in his own mind.
Yeah.
And as the series goes on, he just gets worse and worse. Yeah, so that's the basic idea. I can give you like a more straightforward plot summary, which is that a guy, he's the last bounty hunter, and he joins a new organization called the Agency, who he thinks he's going to end up just doing more bounty hunting work, but it ends up that he's sent out to fight these horrific monsters by the callous head of the agency, who really has no concern over the well-being of his agents.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Well, that's really cool. I'm definitely gonna have to have you, Jake Fredenal, and like two other authors that have mentioned their D&D experiences and
Hmm.
then writing. We'll have to get a really cool seminar question going. With I think that'd be a
Yeah.
great one to analyze. So I think everybody thinks, oh yeah, like everybody in a D&D group who wants to write. I just think everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna write down our campaign, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like I've tried doing that. We had this great campaign that was ran by this like it was like our DM like left, and then we had this high school kid, and we were both like my buddy and I are both like, well, we don't have time, and we're at the gaming store, so we're like, all right, let's try it. And she had one of the best. Like we're in this. Speaking of grim dark or dark fantasy, we're in this dark forest. There were all these cool things that happened. I pissed off a god. I got another one to basically be like my boo thing. And then I met the god of death. I mean, it was like crazy stuff, but it
Oh
was like
man.
really fun. So I'm always like, and my buddy and my characters were very interesting, in very like grim dark classes. And I'm always like, oh, I would love to write, about some of the adventures and things. But I think it's a lot harder, like you said, to really come up with a story, and a plot rather than just, oh, these were cool things we did. So I think it'd be
Yeah.
cool to analyze that. But yeah, that's super cool. Well, that sounds amazing. As soon as I saw your cover, I was like, okay, I gotta check out the blurb. And then I checked out the blurb. And then that day I was like, all right, well, I gotta go check out Joshua's site. Checked out your site, and I was just like, oh my god, it sounds so good. uh, yeah, so I just bought it that day. I was just like, whatever. Like I can't
Oh
wait.
man. I
Um,
appreciate it.
yeah, but I have a problem with Sean and Felix's covers because I
I
must
know.
have them for that. Which is actually another reason why I'm redoing my office, because I'm actually going to, my wife's like, "Oh, we have space," and I'm like, we would if I put little shelves up along. And what I want to
Yeah.
do is like showcase like certain ones. So I found these particular shelves, which are really cool actually. So yours is going to be one of those with marks
Oh,
and yeah, like that I'll have, because I want to be surrounded by, covers and books that make me want to write. I think that, that to me just when I just look at them, be like, okay, I'm ready to write. And I got some posters being made and stuff. A lot of Felix's and Sean's covers
yeah.
actually. And I'll be like framing them and stuff, and it'll just be like my side of the basement. It'd be like a real office finally. But yeah, that was when I read the blurb though, I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. So but yeah, definitely struck me as not your typical um not your typical grimdark fantasy story. Definitely had a lot of elements to me that seemed very unique, which the writer in me and the reader in me, my interest was really piqued. So, but that's where before we got recording, I was like, well, cover, even the lettering, really got me in there. But the blurb I thought was really good. I liked what you had on Amazon for it. We had a lot of really good reviews on Goodreads, so I I thought it was awesome. So it's always interesting to find somebody who is able to do that really early on in their career. It makes me be like, ooh, that's somebody to watch out for. So
Oh,
hopefully,
thank you.
next couple of years we can keep going, and then once somebody snatches you up, offers you a big contract, we can go back to this and return to it. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, when
Well,
it comes
that's
to
great to hear because, oh, sorry.
oh, sorry, my internet cut out there for a second. I was like,
Oh,
"No,
no.
what can I do?" What were you gonna say? Sorry, Joshua.
I was just gonna say I really appreciate that just because I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. So
Well, people always say fake it till you make it,
yeah,
Um,
that's what I'm doing.
but well, I do have to say though, because I like people to know because and I'm sure people on here know this. Like I don't say this to all authors because not all authors are doing the same thing. And some people just kind of have certain things that they do or certain intuitions, I think. Like, like you said, like, "Oh, I really want Felix and Sean, and even though that bumped back your release date, I think that was really smart, and I think that there are certain things that, you can do to help prepare yourself a little bit better. And I think that was personally something that was really smart on your part to do. I really like how you set up your website too.
Hmm.
Yours is one of the websites where I was like saying, I sent to my tech guy, I was like, I kind of like this feel and look more than what we did. So we're always analyzing what we like as readers. Um, so that way we can try to make, my site better and stuff like that. So yours was one where I was like, okay, I really like the cover, I really like the branding. This is the type of branding like we want. So we're really looking, we analyze a lot of authors, we analyze a lot of sites, we analyze a lot of blurbs in
Oh, sure.
particular, like a lot of blurbs. But yeah, I would say just personally, like, just keep doing what you're doing. To me, I really feel like you're gonna experience a lot of success, more than you
Thank
have,
you.
so far. So yeah, so just my personal opinion, but what do I know? So.
Oh, I hope you're right.
Okay, well, it's funny. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but one of my friends who, I really tried to say the same thing from book one of his, and he's really experiencing a lot of success right now, and I with his book two, and I really think that his book three, I really think is going to be, a real big jump for him. So I feel like I've seen it before, I've seen it done, Josh. So yeah, I'm a lookout. But when it comes to your world building, now I'm ever since I read your blurb, I'm like, I gotta ask this question. So when it comes to your world building, what steps do you take to make your world feel unique?
It's a good question. Um, yeah, so I think a lot of it did come out of just the campaign. So maybe something that makes it feel unique is just the fact that it was sort of like maybe community is not the right way to say it, but like the friend group like collaborated upon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That cultural
Like we're all
diversity.
coming up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so like a lot of it came out of that. And then I was just like, all right, well, I could just pick and choose the things that I think are like really cool and just try and like amplify those. So one thing that we had was this very mysterious wind that was like blowing across the whole hemisphere,
Hmm.
or like the whole or not the hemisphere, the equator. It's basically separating the world into two separate hemispheres.
Cool.
And there was really no explanation for this in the campaign. We actually never finished the campaign. We finished like the first arc of it, and then everybody got busy and
Yeah,
it
I know
fell
that.
apart. As yeah, that's always what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but like our DM had an explanation for it, and it was completely different from what mine ended up being. But I was like, all right, I'm going to take that and just kind of like riff on that and try and figure out like why would this crazy high speed wind be blowing around the equator, basically making it impossible to cross the sea. And what I basically came up with like, all right, I need to zoom out because that's a planetary phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah.
So I needed to basically think of something in space or like on the whole planet that basically explained that. And what I came up with was that there are two suns. This is a binary star system that this takes place in. And it's a really weird configuration. Like there's a couple different configurations that binary stars can be in, and planets can basically orbit around the binary star as if they're just one star, like they share a center of gravity. But I wanted my story to basically take place at that center of gravity, because that means that we're closer to the stars. It's a really unstable configuration, which I think leads to some interesting things that haven't quite yet paid off in the story. And the idea was that one of the stars is like bright and hot, and the other is dim and cold. And the different hemispheres basically experience the two different stars, which are called the bright daughter and the shadow sun. And the story takes place in the hemisphere that's illuminated by the bright daughter, and they they see it rise every day, and it kind of wobbles and doesn't rise in the same way. It's not like it rises in the east and sets in the west like on Earth. It's like it could rise in the northwest and set in the northeast, or sorry, it always goes east to west, but it could be like more north or more south, which creates like longer and shorter days. And so like it all just starts ballooning out from there. Like, and then I just kind of repeated that process for all the different elements that I wanted to highlight as part of the story. Yeah,
That's cool. I like that. That's, I think, what makes fantasy and sci-fi unique is you just take something like that and then, it really, really catapults right into something unique. And that's where somebody, I don't know, somebody asked me, they're like, oh, like, what do you do in your podcast? And I'm like, I interview fantasy, sci-fi authors, artists and stuff. And they're like, oh, that sounds boring. I'm like, what do you mean that sounds boring? Like, what?
that sounds amazing, actually.
Yeah, I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, well, fantasy is really just the same thing over and over and over. And I was sci-fi too. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, are you kidding me? And that's where I kind of like, my wife was like, it was like at one of like her, like school functions or whatever. And she was just like, relax, like don't. And I had to be like, woosah, woosah. And I tried to be really polite. I was like, well, actually, and I made the point, right, that like just within sci-fi, like we were just talking, right? With, the crew I'm interviewing for Breaking Infinity, and you think of that movie versus Timeline, Michael Crichton, and they had the Paul Walker movie, versus The Time Machine, H.G. Wells versus Back to the Future. I mean, it's all time machine, right? All sci-fi, but completely different stories, completely different concepts. And I was like, oh my God, you're so wrong. Like that's why I be chicken. And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, that's why you never have any fun. And that's what your voice said. Your voice literally sounds like that. And I'm okay if they ever see this. Yeah, but it was yeah, but I think, ideas like that, really to me as a reader and a writer, I just love that because that just as a reader, that's what I enjoy about the genre. And I think some people might be like, oh, it's a small thing. It's like, well, it's a small thing, but it catapults. And, as a writer, I'm like, oh, there's so many cool things that you can do with that. That gets my mind, my writer mind whirling. So yeah, that sounds really cool. Well, you make a really good point there though, too, with that cultural diffusion. And I just mentioned this because I don't know, I had a couple of authors that thought it was helpful. So who knows any readers or writers in the, in the audience, but I've been running a campaign. Ours just fell apart. Unfortunately, we were
As they
almost
do.
done. We had like two sessions. I'm like, guys, at least give me one long one to finish this first arc. I was actually running a campaign because it was my turn. I was running our campaign within my own fantasy setting. Um, God, being able to play test, not only because I want to do my own gaming book in my own world, but to be able to see how, you know, and everybody in my group is like a different type of fantasy reader, and they like different things. But to be able to play test the ideas, and then the different plots and subplots and things, the different continents, the different species and races and stuff,
Mhm.
was just really cool to get to play test the magic system in particular to see what did and didn't work. Was really cool. So if anybody ever has an opportunity, I highly recommend doing that. Particularly as a writer, it was like really really helpful. But yeah, but that to me sounds really cool. Where you're just kind of like, so you were a player, I assume then, and in your
Yeah.
group, and then just took those ideas. It's a really good idea. I'm gonna have
And
to.
how do you do all this? Like, you're running DMs, you're
Oh,
writing
uh,
stories, you're
do
you're
everything
having a baby,
far
you're
in
on a
advance, my
podcast.
friend. Far in advance. I pre-scheduled everything when people told me, like, so I had like, it was on summer, it was like, I think it was like February break. Or I guess it was like 2 summers ago. And I knew that we were gonna be switching. So I literally, as a writing exercise every day for that summer, to warm up, I took like an hour and I wrote about the campaign. But I already did all the world building basically,
Mm.
and I actually have a book that the campaign is set in. So yeah, it was just like I took like 3 weeks before we switched places, and literally for those 3 weeks, I just wrote like the entire first part of the campaign. And I changed things along the way and stuff because that's just the writer in me. I get a better idea or whatever. But yeah, like
Mhm.
definitely did things out far in advance. So then, well, like once we play, I'm just like, oh, okay, I'll just update this. And I just keep updated notes and stuff. But yeah, organization definitely helped a lot. But now I have all these notes
Yeah.
about this, this other great story taking place in the same country and stuff. I have this amazing map. Now I have, the entire country's mapped out. So it's kind of nice,
Mm.
when I go back to write the second half of my desert story in the same country. It's called The Deserts of Kuman. Um, and it's kind of cool, because I got everything done. So I don't know. People are always
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I get distracted from my gaming." I'm like, my gaming helps me write. So I like that you and me are in the same boat because yeah,
Yeah.
some people, yeah, but I think it's harder, because you have to, like you said, like change ideas and things. But well,
Yeah.
now I
It's
really got
definitely time
now.
consuming.
You left a lot there, and I'm like, oh, now I really gotta now I gotta read the rest of your books to figure out like why how certain things repercuss later. But I like having a world that's built that way though. I have this great book, this world building book. I'm hoping to get a hold of the authors of Scribeforge, but it's the
Mm.
Essential World Building Blueprint and Workbook. And it's funny because a lot of the things you talked about, they give you a graphic organizer and they mention that. They're like, well, do you have one star? Do you have two? Things like that. And it really does a good job kind of breaking that stuff down. But I've always wanted to know somebody that did too. So that's really cool. That makes me even more excited now because I didn't know that from like your, any of your reviews or blurbs or anything. So
Oh yeah.
that sounds really cool.
That's
I
where the
didn't
title
know
of the
that.
series comes from. Dance of the Sibling Sons.
Cool. Oh, that's really awesome. This is why and I also mentioned to the readers, somebody asked me like, well, why don't you read books of authors beforehand? Oh, I was doing that, but then I actually I had an author that does a podcast and he goes, I'm going to try something crazy. I'm like, okay. He goes, talk to an author and then read their book. And I'm like, well, what does that do? I'm like, then you don't know about their book. And he goes, but a lot of times, he goes, you get better questions in your podcast, first of all. He says, second of all, he goes, I get a lot more out of reading their book after I've discussed things with them. And he
Mm.
always does like I do, like no spoilers. And I gotta say, like, it has helped my reading. Like it's because I'll know certain things. I'm like, okay, I gotta get to this. And then it's almost like I have a director's cut in my head going on.
Yeah. You get like the behind the
And
scenes look.
yeah, exactly. And then I'll be like, oh, it makes things so much cooler. So instead of like,
Mm.
and I do that for Audible now too. Like I only listen to books that I've read, and I feel like it really adds to the experience. So I like really particularly for indie. I'm like I've gotten and it makes me as a writer like appreciate things so much more and it almost like helps me map things out in my own books. Like it's almost like I'm taking a writing class just from like reading your book after we've already talked about it. So I've had recommended to people like if you could listen to a podcast of somebody no spoilers first, as a reader, and then do that. I've got to say I'm so glad that he said that to do that, because it's been a lot better. But now I'm like chomping at the bits. I'm actually going to release, because starting to do book reviews when the baby comes, because I stopped doing all these different jobs and stuff.
Yeah,
And pausing
priorities.
yeah, exactly. So I was like, well, I'll probably be reading a lot, on the Kindle, while the baby's there, listening to
Yeah,
books and stuff. So, yeah, but I'm actually releasing my schedule really soon. So it's been so hard though on Kindle in particular to put people, because I'm like, oh, this sounds really cool or sounds really cool, but I'm trying to really stick to like a strict schedule. So,
hmm
yeah, but yeah, I'm pretty excited to get this one done. So when it comes to exciting characters that readers can relate to, what do you do to ensure that your readers will be able to connect with them and cheer them on in your story?
yeah. That's a really tough question
Yeah.
because I'll tell you a story because I think my process is essentially do it wrong first, and
Amen
this
to
is not a
that.
good process.
That's fair.
But the story I was talking about, Grave of the Waiting, um, before I was publishing everything and getting everything on the website, I have a writing group that I work with, and I sent them like the first 2 or 3 chapters, and by the end of it, the main piece of feedback was, I hope the main character dies. I was like, oh no, that's not intended. Like
Yeah,
I know it's a horror story, but like you're supposed to sympathize with this character.
yeah, yeah.
And like yeah, she was like a terrible mother, super selfish, um just really just a bad person. And the problem was that like in my head I knew all of her like positive traits,
Yeah,
and like I knew she was a good person. I rooted for her and I wanted her to do well, but none of that came out in the story. Like it just didn't make it onto the page. And I think what really helped it was getting that feedback, first of all, letting
yeah,
me know
yeah,
that I'm doing it wrong. But then really thinking about like, all right, I need to get inside this character's head and make it so that everybody really understands what her motivations are. Because like before she was like, yeah, I just stay away from my kids and I just like binge the internet essentially. Something like equivalent to that. And I just focus on my work. But really she's focusing on her work to support her family. It never said that in the first draft. I don't know why. It's like just that simple little twist. Not even a twist, just like adding that information. It
yeah,
completely
yeah,
changes the balance of
yeah.
you're spending tons of time at work. So I think that's really just the key to it, is like getting really deep inside the character's head, making sure their motivations are super clear and just come out on the page. And uh, yeah, just like working on that interiority, it's that that's like 90% of making a character likable and more understandable, and making sure you can root for them. But then
Yeah.
also giving them like a goal that's worthwhile. Like you don't want them, I mean, there can be like low stakes stories that you just like the characters and everything, but
Yeah.
for me, I really root for a character when I like understand the stakes, and it's like if they fail, like they like bad things are going to happen. um so yeah, just being able to understand their motivation, giving them goals that you can relate to and you understand, like sort of like the moral framework that they're operating in. I think that's really important, but it's also really hard to do on the first try. So
Yeah.
definitely work with a writing group if you can, just to get some more eyes on it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that relatability piece is, yeah, it's really tricky, and I think sometimes it can be hard, right, with
hmm
um, with fantasy and sci-fi, because you probably can't shoot fireballs out of your hand, or or you don't
Maybe
really
in
know
some
a board.
sci-fi.
Yeah, like yeah. So yeah, I think it's I always look at like what was that movie, like Chappie with the robot, where like
hmm
that's I really like that robot. Like I was really rooting for that robot, and I think that they did such a good job with that movie, because like it's hard to relate to that, and I think that really says a lot. I think it really says a lot with, like Martha Wells with All Systems Red, with her,
Mhm.
main character being like a bionic, robot as well, who doesn't really have, early on, doesn't really have, human emotions because they're not human, and
Mhm.
I just give her a lot of credit, for making you care instantly about that character and, and making that series so good with that. But the relatability piece, like you mentioned, I think is really difficult. And yeah, I think you always have to think like, I even think at the times too, like, with villains too, like, I don't know, maybe it's the Sam Raimi in me or whatever with Spider-Man 2 or whatever, 3, but I'm just like, why I think it's like it's great to just have like an evil villain, but it's like I think that's so like a 70s and 80s thing, like a trope
Yeah.
where you know what I mean, where they don't really have a motivation. Like I think Thanos was a
Mhm.
lot better because you could understand at least that like, okay, I get what you're saying. You're not wrong, but you need to go about this whole process like differently. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I always found that so interesting. I thought like Kung Fu Panda, well, with like the like you get that he suffered a lot of trauma, like whatever he is, the cat dude, whatever. And then I even think the second one too, like it was just on the other day, and we were with our kid's friend, babysitting, whatever. And I was like, I started thinking about as a writer, I'm like, why was this such a good villain? And I'm like, well, that's relatable, like you had a rough childhood, and and we tend to take things out on one another when we're having a bad day or whatever, and it kind of
Mhm.
makes sense that somebody in that trauma would do that. So I think relatability, really comes down to it, I think at times too, like, I think you have to be relatable with all your characters, even the villains. So I
Yeah.
think that's what, really makes I think that's what made like Cobra Kai so endearing to people was like, not just like the comeback stories or, or whatever, but I think it was like showing that we can all be the hero and the villain at different times. And maybe at times we can all relate where we weren't really the hero of our own story, and maybe we were the villain of somebody else's. So I think that
Yeah.
relatability piece is key. So I think that's great advice right there.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes that I always try to keep in mind when writing characters is, I think it originates with Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, but I
Mm.
think I actually first heard it from George R. R. Martin, just watching lots of interviews, which was that the line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every person.
Ooh,
Like, it's just like such a great quippy little quote I love.
yeah,
But like, the idea is that like no one wakes up in the morning, they're like, man, all right, let's be evil today.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're just trying to do the right thing. And even if they're like the villain in your story, like like you said, like they're the hero of their own story, and your character, your protagonist is like the villain of their story. You're just
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
it from the other person's perspective.
yeah. No, it's
Yeah,
very
I mean, we
true.
can get into like moral relativism, but I feel like this isn't a philosophy podcast.
Well, it's just so funny that you mentioned that because I was on with Patrice Fitzgerald yesterday for our interview, and we had discussed. She asked me, um, she asked me because I'm a history teacher. She's like, "How does that help you?" And I was like, "Ooh, we're asking the host a question now." And I'm like, I think it's interesting to see, like here in the United States, like we're always right, even if we're wrong. Vietnam, 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, and um, like knowing people that have fought or died over there, knowing people that have fought and come back and are still fighting, post traumatic stress disorder and stuff. It's like, it really does make it interesting to put in a fantasy setting because my kids ask all the time. We're just getting done next week with Reconstruction, and they're like, how are people this dumb? Like of course people we're all equal, and I'm like, but we're still doing the same thing today. And then we, point out different groups, and we had kids being like, oh my God, like, am I the hero of my story or am I the villain of someone else's story? And it was just interesting to have those conversations with them, because you almost don't know sometimes, and you
Yeah.
know, I think having those real conversations also, within, your book too, like I think it's easy to see, right? Like I like Robert Jordan's take on, racism where it's not necessarily about what skin color you are, but what country you're from, and
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that he explored some really interesting cultural and societal things, and some degradations and stuff. So yeah, it makes it interesting, like when you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, they're the bad guys, they're the good guys. It's like, okay, well, life's not that black and white. So yeah, that
Yeah.
moral gray area tends to be interesting, I think, particularly within fantasy and sci-fi, because you can explore that a little bit more. I think you can, because I think in real life it's hard for us to take a look at that because we have to take a great look at ourselves. But
Yeah. And it's so loaded. Like if you start talking about real people, then it starts coming across as like you're judging them, and it's like,
yeah, yeah,
who are you to judge?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Whereas if you like made up all these people, yeah, you can judge away. You
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah. Yep. Yep. Well, that's like I totally blanked. This is probably 12 years ago, and I was reading an indie author for sci-fi, and like the whole first half of the book was just brilliant. I think it was James Cooper, Matt Cooper. I think it's Matt Cooper, but like I think the book is called Heavy Duty. But he's got this like race of cat people, and then he's got this other like race that comes in, and like he totally in the first part like gets you to hate one group in book like part one, because it's this group's perspective. You hate that group because they do these horrible things. But
mhm,
then this other group comes in part two, and then you actually now reading the first part, first hand accounts of the first group, and then you're reading about how evil the other group is. And then there's a third group of humans that come in, and then see the interaction between these two groups, and they're trying to, and they don't speak the language. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Like, do we help this side? Do we help this side? And I mean, it was just
mhm.
written so well, where I was like, is that not us in a nutshell? I mean, it was some of the best writing that I like. I was just thinking about it the other day. I was like, I gotta go back and finish this series, because I
Yeah.
mean, to write it like as if one group is the villain and then the next one is if the heroes, I just thought was absolutely brilliant. But makes me
Yeah.
want to read
That's a
the same
great
book.
idea.
I know, right? Yeah, it'd be really cool. Well, if you could visit any part of your own fantasy world, where would it be and why?
Hmm. Yeah. So I feel like there's not any like really great place to visit. Like everybody's got every country in the Bright Empire, which is like the series of island countries in the northern hemisphere, um, illuminated by the bright daughter. um, yeah, they've all got big problems, but I think the most like utopian, I guess, of them would probably be where the character called Enoch comes from, which is this place called Seapot Isle, where basically it's just like it's part of an archipelago of islands, and Seapot is this island that like sits sort of like at sea level, except it like dips down, and when the tides come in very chaotically, the water just like overflows into their like sort of bowl island and
Hmm.
creates like this lake. And these people are like very in tune with nature because like all of their industry and all of their agriculture and everything depends on these cycles of uh, just like tides and the sun and everything. So I think that would be a nice place to live. They're very in tune with nature. They're very um, sort of like connected to magic in the world too.
Hmm.
Um, but of course, they have their problems too. Like every place does, right?
Yeah.
It'd be really boring to write just like the perfect place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Oh, that sounds really cool. Well, speaking of powers, if you could have any skill or magical power from one of your characters, which would it be and why?
So I think again, it's going to be Enoch.
Okay.
But yeah, there's basically only two types of magical powers the uh, in the series. There's arch magic, which is all right. I'm gonna give a little bit away here, but there's arch magic, which is like
Spoiler
fire.
alert.
Yeah, spoilers. Turn off the no, don't
Pause,
turn it off.
pause. Skip to question eight.
um, yeah, so there's arch magic, which is like has two aspects. There's fire and there's dark, and they're very interrelated as we explore a little bit more in Sibling Sons 2, because our protagonists. Well, all right, I won't give away too much. um, but yeah, Enoch is like the one guy who kind of gets it, and he knows there's like fire and dark, but most people are just like, it's all fire. There's only archfire, and they refuse to acknowledge this like dark aspect. Um, But the other power is the sort of benefactor power, which is the power that, like the plague and the emotions and everything like that I was talking about earlier. And the character who has that is going slowly insane. So I definitely don't want that one.
It's fair. No Rand Althor's here, right? Like,
Actually, so I'm in the middle of reading The Wheel of Time for the first time right now.
oh,
And I'm
cool.
in the so-called slog. I'm on book 8 now.
Oh, I was gonna say
And
I'm at book 7, but I'm waiting for my buddy because we're doing Mal's Book of the Fallen. He's never read Wheel of
oh,
Time.
nice.
As soon as we're done with Cripple God, we're gonna do like a whatever book in between, but that's gonna be our next series. Yeah.
Is that your first time reading through?
Yeah. I was
Okay.
gonna finish them up so that Mark, Timmy, and I could do we want to do a spoiler edition. Yeah, so you have to let me know when you finish. I'm gonna have like 4 authors that have read the series, and we'll be doing a spoiler edition and going through and kind of dissecting.
Nice.
Yeah. The slog
Yeah.
is definitely definitely it's sluggish. That's why I'm kind of excited to have a reading buddy to go through the first time with, because without him, I
Yeah.
would not have made it through all these Malazan Book of the Fallen books, because all my favorite
Yeah.
characters tend to die pretty quick. So.
R.I.P. Whiskey Jack. I'll never forget you.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I actually am not finding it all that sloggish, but maybe that's just because I'm reading it as an audiobook. So I just like
Oh,
keep going, and I'm just like,
yeah, they do such a
yeah,
good job. Yeah.
they
Every
do.
time I get done with one, I'll wait, I'll do another audiobook, and then I'll do the audiobook. I've been doing that with the
Mhm.
Will White Cradle series too. But
Ooh,
that's a great narrated series right there, honestly. Yeah, they're awesome.
yeah. I, Will White series I heard is amazing too,
Oh
and
my
it seems
god.
like a great palate cleanser because they're like pretty
Yep.
short, pretty fast paced to put
Yep,
in
that's what I'm
between
doing
these
right now. Yeah,
long.
'cause yeah, I just got done with another book that was a little bit bigger, and um, while I love the world building and the characters, they were just, you could tell it was the author's, like, like pretty early book. Um,
Mhm.
I want to apologize to my readers. I'm sure they'll have me too. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
a great book. But I'm using it as a palate cleanser before going to their book too, which is definitely a bit of a chunker. But yeah, I highly recommend
Mhm.
it. He's got some amazing world building, and yeah, there's just, I don't want to give it away. There's one thing that he does in book 1 that is just like, I think is absolutely brilliant and just makes it very, very unique. So from a writer standpoint, I think all writers, if you write fantasy or sci-fi, should read his series, at least the first 3, at least get to Black
Mhm.
Fire. So yeah, very good.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's so successful as an indie author too. Like,
So
we should all be reading his stuff,
yeah,
figure out what he's doing right.
yeah, I agree. I want to try and get him on for season 3. For sure. I want to talk to him and like his team. But he's my inspiration though, because he's hired like his friends and family, and
Mhm.
that's just what he does. I'm like, oh my god. I'm like, to hire my 2 best friends would be awesome. Like, just to like work
Right?
from home, or yeah, just to do whatever. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
I forget what we were even talking about. What
Oh,
was
you
the
were
question?
sorry. We were talking about Rand and kind of going a little
Oh,
crazy
that's
there and
right.
using the power.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess since I'm reading The Wheel of Time and Rand is going insane, it's probably more than a little bit of an inspiration
That's
to my
fair.
second book.
Oh, that's
um,
awesome. That's
yeah.
cool.
But I'm trying to like not do it exactly the same way because I don't want to just
Yeah,
like rip off what he's doing. Plus, I have to do it in like 3 books, not 14. So,
that's fair. The thinking of the slog, the first the first trilogy slog of an author, right? Yeah, you got
mhm.
to get it all done
Oh.
in 3 versus 14 like him. Yeah,
Man,
that's my
I couldn't
goal
even
one day.
imagine
I know,
writing
right?
a 14 book series. Well, I mean, I guess he wrote
They're not
11.
small. Yeah, and none
No.
of them are small. I mean,
Yeah.
they're all. You could kill somebody with the hardcover. Any of them. Yeah, I think you could kill somebody with the paperback. Honestly, if you throw it hard
Yeah.
or at the right angle. Yeah, yeah, that's a good series though. I loved his. I don't even know. Like, I was trying to explain it to my buddy, my best friend, and I was like, let's just read it. I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. I'm like, because
Mhm.
he asked me, because like there are different things. I am really glad that we're reading Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I am glad we're doing it as a buddy read, because there are so many things as a writer where I'm like, okay, I love this. I don't love this, and I've learned so much from Steven Erickson, just from the writing process, being a writer and reading his work. And I'm
Mhm.
kind of glad that, because I've really enjoyed Wheel of Time. I'm glad that I am pausing there, and I actually just got caught up with the audio as well. So I feel like pretty good about it. I'll probably listen to the sixth book again before we start book seven, right
Mm,
before the summer. But yeah, I mean, it's cool as a writer, right? To, like you said, like, oh, I want to do this, but do it differently. It's like, it's just so funny because that's like cultural diffusion in a nutshell, right? Like somebody gives you that
yep.
idea. And that's why I do these interviews. You've said a lot of things today where I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. I have a desert setting, and I'm like, I've been debating doing Two Sons for it, doing the
Hmm,
tattooing thing. And
nice.
yeah, and I don't know, there's different things that I think would be really cool with it. So you really got me thinking now, like, should I go back and, reanalyze that, and I think that's what's great about talking to different authors. And, I said something the other day, and so it's like, oh, that's a really good idea. I might have to consider that. And I'm like, yeah, feel free. I'm like, I want to do a seminar where you and I and three other authors are all given the same idea, and then we write a short story or like a chapter one about that idea, and then we come together and see how that same idea has been
Mm,
changed. I think that would just be like,
yeah, that'd be so much fun.
yeah, it'd be a really cool writing exercise just to show that, there's only so many words in the English language, but at the same time, the way that you put them together, it's like, it's incredibly different. So I think it'd be really
Mhm.
cool. But yeah, definitely.
Speaking of Steven Erickson, he's another guy who based his stories on a campaign, right? A
Yeah,
D&D
yeah, yeah,
campaign.
yeah. Well, oh, I cannot believe I'm forgetting the name of his co-author. um,
Oh man.
God, we just read him. Return to the Crimson Guard, though. Um, yeah, I mean, it was so interesting to learn that, and then to read like his partner stuff, and to see how they kind of dance around each other and both add
Mhm.
into the world building. And they write about some of the same characters and stuff. And but I mean, it really yeah, it was very very different within the same world. And but it was really cool. It was like a really cool experience. So I think when we're doing Wheel of Time, we're gonna go back, and I still can't believe I'm blanking on his name, and we're gonna read his the rest of his stories. And it's cool because we'll already know like the main plot, when those ones for him, they're like in between like the main storyline. But now they got
Mhm.
those like prequels and trilogies and novellas and things like that. So
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll definitely finish all the Malazans at some point. The Bridge Burners have to be one of my favorite crews of all time, and I just love
same.
yeah, like that, and like Glenn Cook's Chronicles of the Black Company, like the Black Company. I
Mm.
just love that. I love that like elitist, almost like Navy SEAL like mentality that people have of them, or Roman Legion esque kind of
Oh,
thing.
nice.
But yeah,
That's another one that's on my shelves back there, and I haven't gotten to it yet.
I got to like book four. I have to say, don't do what I did and get to book four, and then go, oh, I'll just read. I was almost done with the last chapter, and then I went on to book five and read the back cover like an
Mm.
idiot, and then there's a spoiler there. Don't do that. But yeah, yeah, that was a great series. That's the one I'm gonna definitely have to go back to. And I'm kind of I think I'm on book five. I think maybe book six. I'm on the one where it's like it splits off, where you have some of the characters that split off
Mm.
from the main company and stuff, and kind of do their own thing. So I kind of like took a break, but I think I read all of them within like 3 weeks. Like the first
Oh
like four
man.
or five. Yeah, they were good. He's a very different writing style, but it was once you get used to it, it's really enjoyable, and I just love the characters. But yeah, his world building is just absolutely insane. I mean, just and he does his books aren't even that big, but he does so much and
Yeah.
builds so much just with the I always love when you can have an author do that. I have an author for Forgotten Realms here, um, where it's a standalone. Oh, yeah, it's called Blade Singer. It's Keith Francis Strum, and I want to see what else Keith has written. But this is amazing, and you get this character, and 20 pages in, I'd say, and I absolutely love the characters, and
Wow.
I really wanted to. He did so much in 20 pages. I'm like, how do you do that as a writer? It was incredible. I was like, I need like 100 pages, so
Yeah.
maybe one of those days. But yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I have such respect for authors that can really write like a really just streamlined, condensed story, still make it feel like a big world. It's got lots of layers and depth.
Dune, yeah, Dune in a nutshell. I mean, he did more world
Yeah.
building in book one than most people do. And in no offense to Jordan, like a 14 book series. I mean, just
Hmm.
Yeah, just incredible. I take a novella or a short story and then it turns into a trilogy. So I do the opposite. Maybe one of these days I'll get the hang of it. But yeah, that's
Yeah. Another person who did that really well was Evan Winter with the Rage of Dragons.
oh my God, he's on my
Oh my
list.
goodness.
I grabbed the first two books. I was like somewhere in, oh, I was at one of my favorite independent bookstores, Northshire in Saratoga
Mm.
Springs. They got one in Vermont too. Yeah, and like we were on a trip there to see my mother-in-law. That's where she lives, and I was like, oh my gosh, book one's here in paperback, and it was like the first day, so I bought book one, and that's right when he released book two, and well, I guess it was when book two was released in paperback because they were relatively around the same time because of the pandemic. And then we went to the other
Mhm.
bookstore, their only other location, and book two was sitting there in paperback. My wife's like, "Just do it." I'm like, so I got both of them. I was like coming home, like a little school kid. I was so excited. Yeah, I cannot wait for that one. I'm doing with another friend of mine. I bought him book one. Yeah, so we're gonna do a book club reading of it, but instead of doing it from like a reader standpoint, we're doing it from a writer standpoint. So
Mm.
that'll be like my first writers book club book. So I'm pretty excited to do it for that one. I've heard so many good things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Oh, that's
Great
awesome.
book.
I'm
And
looking forward to it.
the pacing, like I've never read a book
I've
with
heard.
faster pacing.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I'm really anxious to read that one for to learn like how he did his pacing because I've heard that from so many different people and like that's what I want people to say about one of my books in particular for like the first book because I want to really springboard and I want it to feel like it only happens within like 4 days and everything's
Mhm.
pretty crazy. So I'm really looking forward to see how he did his pacing because it's a big book, and
Yeah.
I just think that's interesting. I've had so many people be like, "Oh yeah, I missed work the next day," like I had to like finish. I was 150 pages and it's like 2 a.m. and I just decided to plow through and I'm like,
Yep.
that's amazing. I've heard that from multiple people that I trust. So I just think that's crazy. The
Yeah.
skill. I definitely want to have Evan on though. He's one of my like I have a few bigger names for season three that I'd like to get on to after I've read their book, just to kind of pick their writer brain a little bit more in
Mhm.
detail. But yeah, he's definitely on my list.
Nice. Yeah, I have a theory that's probably kind of dumb about pacing, but
Okay.
I think a lot of it comes down to shorter chapters. Just like full stop. That's it. Short chapters, you have a faster paced book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was talking to somebody and that's what theirs is like. Oh my God. Now I'm gonna blank. I believe it was. I think they said like 1,800 words, and I'm like, what? I'm like, how do you get a chapter done? Unless you're just doing one POV, I guess. I'm more used to like, I've noticed my stats are like 2,000 to about like somewhere around 2,300 words per chapter.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I was like, holy crap! But I do agree with you though. Like there are books where I'm like, okay, maybe there are more chapters in the book or more POVs, like three or four POVs, and each one's a chapter. But yeah, it
Mhm.
definitely seems like when I get to one where I'm like, I mean, that's the only thing about Malzahn Book of the Fallen. Like, you could literally be in like an 80-page chapter.
Oh, I know.
And, you know what I mean? Like, I think one we did was like, it was like 110 pages. And I'm like, oh my God. And we do it by chapter per week. And I'm
Oh
just like,
yeah.
so that week we were like a week and a half and I read like 160 pages and that was two chapters, and
Mhm.
I think that it would feel better at times going through. And I think about that, like, does it feel better for your reader? Oh, I got done with a chapter. I just think as humans that helps us out. So I do agree. I've been
Mhm.
tending to reduce mine. I think a couple once I get this one book done, I think I'm gonna actually go through and cut out a couple of the last parts and put it on the next chapter so it's a little bit,
Mhm.
those little cliffhangers or the page turner effect or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, shorter
So
chapters I tend to enjoy as a reader more. Yeah.
I've definitely noticed that in myself too. So the in Ocean of Others, like I think the average page or after average chapter length was like 4,000 words,
Oh, okay.
maybe even longer. Um, I'm really trying to stick to like an average of 2,000 for this sequel. I think
Oh,
that's
very
going to
nice.
help a lot.
Yeah.
It's also more fun to write that way for whatever reason. I don't know why.
I yeah, I agree. I think once I do the anywhere from like 2,200 to like 2,500, I it just seems yeah, it seems to be my average for like a chapter. Like that's when I'm like
Mhm.
done with the words for that spot. I don't know why. I think it's because
Mm,
I do feel it's as a reader, I've been reading more books like that. So I think that's where, I'm almost like my mind's been thinking that way, in terms of scenes and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Curious if that's like a trend that like chapters are getting shorter or shorter.
I
Maybe
have
it's
thought
like
that.
we all got to compete with TikTok now, so we need like 5 minute chapters.
Yeah, yeah. No, I do think that it has a lot to do with, technology and, attention span and things like that. But my friend made a good point. He thinks that it has a lot to do with TV shows too.
Mm,
With like the reduction of episode lengths and stuff like that, and commercials but I think again it goes to, technology, because they want that commercial to make you go on your phone. Things like that. YouTube, I think, has, like YouTube back in the day didn't have the ads. Now there's like 100, and it's like I listened to one video the other day on an author that they did, and they clearly have a lot of ads, like a lot of sponsorship. The 15-minute clip, and there were 5 ads that were like
oh my
a minute and a
goodness.
half. Yeah, I was just like, I'm glad you're doing well, but I was like, I really just wanted to, it kind of turned me off from listening to, their podcast now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of want to listen on Spotify now. So it doesn't do that. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, pacing's definitely one that I have been thinking about lately a lot more.
Yeah. It's hard to get right too, because there's like
Agree.
it's almost like fractal. Like you need
It really
the
is.
right pacing for this paragraph, you need the right pacing for this page, this scene, this the whole book. It just blows up.
No, I totally agree. Well, it's like I keep thinking, I'm like, well, so my buddy and I talked about it, and she was like, well, you should just write the book and then worry about it later. She's like, you can just, move some of those end paragraphs or something like that around. She goes, then you could always just, rewrite it as like it's the start of this chapter. Just to, I just write, and then she goes, I worry about the pacing later, particularly
Mm,
with like draft 2 and 3. And I'm like, God, that's a much better idea. Like, just get the words, just vomit on the page, and then worry about the mess later. And she's like, yeah. I'm
yeah.
like, okay. But I still think, with efficiency's sake, like later on, I do want to try to write, with better pacing right from the start. Because I'm thinking like, well, even if when you regurgitate, I'm like, that's a lot of cleanup work. So I
Yeah.
just, especially with having a baby, I'm trying to make myself more efficient.
Yeah.
I have to be dealing with a lot of regurgitation soon, so I don't think I need to do it in my writing. So yeah, yeah, pacing is definitely one that I probably should be adding more questions about pacing now that I think about it. I think I'm going to do that for season 2.
Yeah.
That's definitely
I
one.
would love to hear more from writers about how they handle that, because that's a problem that I don't know that I've fully
Yeah,
wrapped my head around yet. I need
yeah,
more
no,
info.
yeah, that's a good one. Pacing question.
But yeah, to your friend's process, I do think it makes sense to just like consider the first draft like a vomit draft, like
Yeah,
whatever
it has
comes
to
out,
be.
just do it.
Yeah.
But
Otherwise, you don't get
at
it
the
down.
same time, oh yeah, yeah. But at the same time, I really just want to get it right the first time because I'm so lazy. Like, I don't want to go
Hard to
back
get
and
through
redo
4 or
everything.
5. Yeah, yeah. Somebody the other day was like, "Oh, I go through like 13 times." I'm like, I don't have that much time.
No,
Yeah,
I can't do 13 drafts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What's like my draft 2 right now for my first fantasy novel? I'm like, I just started re-outlining, and it's been taking me like a year and a half to re-outline, and I've tried
Hmm.
going back in, writing it a few more times. It just was not working. And the other day we're at birthing class, and I was just like about to fall asleep. We have a great teacher. I was just so tired, and it's like 7 to 9 o'clock at night, or 6 to 9. So it's just a long class, and you're like sitting
Hmm.
there listening to
Oh
people.
man.
And I like had my notebook with me. I was like, oh, I just wanted to get a couple of, scenes outlined. The next thing I know, I had like 6 pages of outlining later. And I like had fixed like 5 or 6 major problems. So I was just like, I don't know why it
It's a
took me a
good birthing
year
class.
and a half. I know, right? Yeah. Well, I think it's because I'm used to college. I was in college, I was used to writing and then drawing at the same time as taking notes, because when you have a 3 hour class, it's like, and they don't want you to have your phone out, and I don't think it's good anyway.
Hmm.
I don't pay attention that way, but I can multitask, and I would do whatever, and then I'd write the note and I'd think about it, and then I go back to, whatever world building or character or something I was drawing or writing. But I think that's like I'm just so used to that process now. So
Hmm.
that's why I'm praying as a father that I can multitask like that. Like,
Yeah.
like get something done. But yeah, yeah, it'd be
Are you
interesting.
someone who works on like multiple projects at the same time? You strike me as someone
I
who does.
I I just have to get words down in a day. So
Mm,
um I think I was doing such a good job focusing, and then um I think just like with the baby, like with the anxiety, like I don't
mm,
really, I'm not somebody that tends to openly feel my anxiety. I tend to just get like kind of restless, and it's
Mm.
like under the surface. So I really have seen lately where that's affected my writing. So I feel like there's just certain times where I just get something down. Like the other day, I had this really secret project, and I was listening to something online, a really good podcast. It's called Writer's Roots. It's on Spotify. It's amazing. And the host, she was discussing world building, and she gave me this great idea for the secret project I was working on. So I like paused the podcast, and then that whole night, I think I got like almost 5,000 words of world building
Oh
and
man.
characterization. Yeah, like done. I mean, it was like I was just like boom, and I had fixed a lot of problems for the world, the magic system. I had gotten a lot down for the different characters, cultures, and things, and stuff was just a flowing. So I didn't want to stop the spout. And then the next day, I was kind of tapped out on that, and then I went
Hmm.
back to. I have like I'm for some reason I'm missing like 3,000 words from my first prequel novella for my urban fantasy. So now I have to like try and I've looked through all my notes. I have to go back and
Oh
like
no.
rewrite it. Yeah, I was
It
supposed to
just
send it to my
disappeared.
beta readers. Yeah, it just disappeared. It's just like
Oh.
gone. So yeah, so I was like working on that. So yeah, at this point with the baby, I'm just like if I can just get words down and just get going. But it used to be a lot a lot worse because I wouldn't go back to
Yeah.
whatever. So now I've been doing that a little bit just so because sometimes I'm just like I just don't have it for that particular idea. So I'll go and work on something else that I want to work on that day, or maybe I was thinking about, and then I'll solve that problem. But I've been doing a
Mhm.
much better job coming back to my main two projects because they're the ones I want to come out, for next fall. And then I got a couple of Kindle Vella short stories series that I'm starting. So I've pretty much
Hmm.
just been instead of working on like 8 projects or 10, I've really just been working on like 3 right now and trying to get things done. So yeah, but I mean, it's funny because like that's where like Jake Fred and I were talking about. He's like, if I don't do that, he's like, everything stops. He's like, if I
Hmm.
just try to cram on this one idea. And for me, a lot of times, like when I take a break and I go do something else and then come back, I do a lot better on the main thing that I'm working on, which is why I think I did such a good job with the outlining and stuff. When I just take that break, it's like when you can't think of what something's called, right? Or who that
Hmm.
actor was. I was thinking of something last night before bed. I was like, why can't I think of what this thing is? And like I went to sleep and then I woke up being like, oh, it's this thing. Like, why couldn't I think of that word?
Took all night.
Yeah, it literally took all night and like 8 hours of sleep to do, but I finally got it. But yeah, it's interesting, I think, to talk to different authors about, different processes and things. Cause yeah, I think we're all different and our brains work differently. And, we all have different
Definitely.
stresses and motivators and experiences. And speaking of reading, we all read different authors. And I think a lot of that seeps into, your different styles. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My brain is the exact opposite of that. Like I need to just like focus on one thing and to see it
Yeah.
through to completion, which it's why my serial that I've got going on every month, I have to like like context switch. I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
giving me a headache.
yeah. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Well, I have a friend like that. He could not absolutely not switch. Otherwise, he can't ever get back into his voice again. And he was saying
Mm.
to me today, he's like, he goes, you switch your voices so easily. I'm like, I just don't think I have a choice. I'm like, otherwise, like I said, I don't get anything down. But he's gotta
Hmm.
takes him so long. Like he finished like book 3 and then he went and did something else, and then he was even having trouble just slipping into the new voice. And he's like, it just takes me so long. I'm like, well, again, I think that everybody's different, but I don't tend to forget those things for whatever reason, and I can just pick up where I left off, and I have better ideas rather than I'm ahead rather than being behind. And
Hmm.
I had to fight that for a while because people were trying to tell me, who like do your style, which there's nothing wrong with, but they were trying to get me to be like them, and I'm not like you or them, and it was making me less effective. So I think that's a good thing for writers in our audience to think of, like go with what makes you more effective, not
Yeah.
necessarily like you can do what we both do and it might not work. You might have to find a third option or a fourth or a fifth option. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Everybody's got to just craft their own process. It's
yeah,
part of what makes writing so difficult in a way, I
I
guess.
agree. Yeah, because you can't just teach people. There was like my kids
Hmm.
at school like teach me how to write, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm like, how do I even remotely do that? I think that's where now it's a lot harder to teach reading too because so many people are different. And as a teacher, I think that's one thing I've learned is like we all are very very different in a lot of different ways, and it tends to, in education, we're taught, right? We're all the same. and we're all supposed to do
Yeah.
the same exact same, thing the same way. And it's just not like that, and I think writing in particular, I find so enjoyable because you and I can both do it 1,500 different ways, but both still come up and, with these great ideas and craft, really great work. Well, at least you can.
I'm sure you can too.
But it makes it more exciting, and when you tell me that you're working on book 2, that gets me excited because I'm like, well, I want to see how Josh with his, with your way, with your pacing, with your tools, comes up with this great work, and I just think that's what makes, what we do so enjoyable personally, because it's not even just my writing I find enjoyable. I find, and not even, it's not even I find your book enjoyable. I find your writing process,
Mm,
enjoyable, and learning about that. So I think as a writer, it's cool because I can read your work, but then we can talk about it and I can really read your work, or, and there's just so many different facets to it that I find fascinating. And I don't know, it's just an interesting thing that we do. I don't know.
yeah. It makes me think of what we were talking about before, where your friend said, like, why you interview fantasy authors, like that's boring. Fantasy is all the same. And I feel like
Yeah,
maybe if she said that in like the 70s, she was right.
that's fair. No, that's fair. Yeah,
But
or
like,
even fantasy or sci-fi too. Yeah, I feel like that's fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like these days, like we're definitely in a golden age with like indie publishing and everything. Like there's so many unique stories coming out. Like
Yeah,
nothing is impossible at this point. Like you
yeah.
can write a story about anything.
Well, it really is. We're
Amazing.
really in a renaissance. Yeah, we're
Hmm.
really are, and I don't think a lot of people realize like renaissance means revival. And I
Hmm.
really think we are in a revival right now of fantasy, sci-fi, horror. I think just indie alone has really, revived the, like heck, like the independent bookstores are on the rise right now. They said I have an article that I kept, and I'm gonna frame it. And it said 10, no, seriously, 10 years ago. And this was right when it was about nine, yes, 10 years ago. So about 9 years ago, I met Brandon Sanderson before he was Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, when In the Name of the Wind had just come out 2 weeks before, or I guess 2 months before, and was just getting up there. Um, it was Kevin Hearn had put it on down at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale. I met Brian McCullen with his first Powdered Mage book. Michael J. Sullivan had just released his third book in his first trilogy. Just hilarious guy, loved him. And there were just so many people there, with the indie community, and that's really where I learned about the indie community. And it's so funny to me that right then I was at an independent bookstore, and that like article came out 6 months before that, and then literally now you look almost 10 years later and I have a new article that says the rise of indie publishing or the rise of independent bookstores, and I want to put them side by side because I think it
What did
really
the
goes.
first article say?
It said that independent bookstores are dead, and that's right
Oh,
when like Barnes and
yeah.
Noble had. Well, that's when Barnes and Noble, like a decade ago, had really hit its main, you know, it's really its climax, I think, and that's really where Amazon was struggling and was really just trying to figure out whatever, and that's before the pendulum really shifted for them, but particularly
Hmm.
for indie publishing. And but I think it'd be so funny to have both of them side by side because I really think it goes to show you right that everything trends. And uh,
Hmm.
I think it really shows that we are in a renaissance for for publishing because independent bookstores are on the rise now. So I just think that indie publishing has a lot to do with that. So yeah,
Yeah. It also shows that like the future is unpredictable. Like
I agree.
you never know what's going to happen.
Yep,
So just write the story that's in your heart, and
totally agree.
who knows, it could blow up
Yeah,
like Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes.
thank you. I've been referencing him a lot recently. Yep, yep. I totally agree with that. You never know when it could be the next Travis, or that's what someone asked me. I was like, I'm just gonna write what I want to write and put the books out there and try to be nice to people and help other authors or people out, and the rest will just keep doing what I'm doing and the rest will come later. So yeah,
Yeah. I feel like that's all you can do. And like the writing community and the reading community is just so supportive, so helpful,
yeah,
just full of amazing people who
yeah,
want to see everybody succeed.
yeah. It's
And
definitely a fun place
it's
to
just
be.
great.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. Well, Josh, for that last question, do you have any promos, news, updates, current projects, anything like that that you can share with us before we head out?
Yeah. So I guess I have a couple things going on right now. So first, obviously, the An Ocean of Others just came out a couple months ago. So pick that up if you can. If you're, what'd you say?
I
Didn't
say
come
buy
through.
it. Yeah, definitely got to buy
Bye.
it.
um, Appreciate that. um, yeah, we've got An Ocean of Others. I'm working on the sequel to that right now. It doesn't have a title right now, so I'm just calling it Sibling Sons 2. I started that for NaNoWriMo, wrote the first 35,000 words.
Oh wow. Awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a very different book from the first one, hopefully in a good way.
Yeah.
Of trying to take everything I learned about what not to do from the first one and fix it. But it's going to be 3 POVs, whereas the first one's 1 POV. So the story's just getting bigger and bigger. And I have no idea how I'm going to wrap it up in 3 books. Who knows? Maybe I am writing a 14-book series.
Yeah. Quintet, yeah.
And then I've got Grave of the Waiting, which goes out with my newsletter. Well, pretty much with my newsletter on my website every month. So on the 1st of every month, I put out a new chapter. And on the 4th of every month, I put out a newsletter. So if you're interested in that, you can go to joshse.com. And then there's a sign up link right at the top. And I don't spam. And I only send 2 emails a month. And it's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've got going on right now. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, it's fair. Well, I just want to remind the audience that you can find all of Joshua's social links, his website, things like that in the description, anywhere where this video and audio can be found. I just want to also remind people our big push for season 2 is to please review those products anywhere where you have found them, whether it's Goodreads, Amazon, Audible, things like that, Barnes and Noble even. That way authors such as Joshua can continue to, come and talk to us about the great writing that they're doing. It definitely helps out all authors, but particularly indie authors, to get their books out there. Well, Joshua, thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure talking to you. I feel like we could talk all day about fantasy and sci-fi. So I will, definitely try to, get you on for, some of our seminars and things like that we'll be holding in the late spring and summer. I think you, me, and Jake personally would just have a great time. I have another author friend that I have not gotten an interview yet, but who, had expressed interest in the D&D to, campaigns to writing seminar in particular. So I think the 4 of us would have a good time for that. So I got you down for that in particular. So I'll save a slot for you for that. So
yeah, I'd love to join you. Get Steven Erickson in too.
Yeah, that's there. Yeah. Oh my God, I want to just see how he does his notes. I wanted to
right.
I just want to see I want to see how he does what he does. I just think it'd be crazy. If I can't keep track in a book or 3, I want to see how he does it in 10 books. So
yeah,
cool. Well, that's awesome. Well, Josh, if there's anything else I can do, in the meantime to help you out, just hit me up on Twitter, send me an email. I'll be sending you all this information the next couple of days. That we'll be all set. But if there's anything else I can do or we can do in the meantime, just let me know, tag me, send it to me. I'll share whatever you have on, Twitter or any other, place that you want me to share. I'll do it on TikTok. But yeah, if there's anything else I can do in the meantime to help you out in any way, just let me know and be more than happy to.
I really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you, Daniel.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. Well, Josh, you have a great rest of the day, and I'll be sending that email, and I'm sure I'll talk to you on social media soon, my friend.
All right. Take it easy.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.